I'd like to welcome Wendy, who's come with Nick from Health Watch today. I hope you enjoy the meeting today. Please feel free to take part if you wish. And I think we haven't any other new members, have we? Sarah, you're here instead of...
So yeah, apologies from Ruth, who's on holiday, lucky girl, and I'm here for Ruth. And apologies for me, I do need to leave at 12, unfortunately, to be in Exeter for 1. So.
Yeah, I think actually you may not be alone, so we'll try and be finished on time, okay? Right, we need to start off the agenda today. We have to start with the confirmation of chair. Are you all still happy for me to continue as chair of the board? Yep. And we need to appoint a vice chair, and I would like to propose Sheila McCormack is the vice chair of the committee. Is there a seconder?
I'm happy to second that.
And is everybody happy with that? Thank you. Welcome, Sheila. Apologies.
We've had apologies from Amanda Fisk, Alison Hernandez, Professor Trish Livesey and David Behrman.
Okay, thank you. I need to ask, are there any declarations of interest? None? All right, on to the next item, the minutes of the last board meeting. Do you want me to go through them page by page, or are you quite happy to sort of like pick out anything that you're not happy with and we'll sort it out? We all happy? Right, I'll sign them at the end of the meeting. Questions from the public, Ross? None? Okay, right over to agenda item 8, delivery of acute hospital services in Devon. Kevin, over to you.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think we've got some slides. Just wait. Oh, right, okay, so up to me then. Someone want to help me? What have I done?
Bring it up, but you should be able to control it.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, we just get these slides. It's the one with the circle on down, middle one. No, go back. And then that does that. Okay. Fine, okay, well, sorry for that. So just for those of you that don't know me, I'm Kevin Baber. I'm the Director of Strategic Development up at Plymouth Hospitals Trust. But for the first 6 months of this year, I've been supporting some colleagues in the Devon STP team with the acute service review. So if you look at the first slide there, you can see that the acute hospital and specialised service review is one of 7 strands to the Devon STP Sustainability and Transformation Plan. And clearly ourselves at the hospital, colleagues from Live Well South West and Plymouth City Council are key players in the development of the Devon STP. So I'm here to talk to you about the initial recommendations arising from the acute service review. So just in terms of some background in context, the reason why acute services have been reviewed in the 4 hospitals in Devon is against a backdrop of growth in demand, and you can come up to the hospital and you can see that real time if you want to sit in the emergency department at the weekend. Significant workforce issues and a difficulty in meeting national constitutional standards. And I think it's fair to say that all of those issues apply to Derriford, where whilst we're the biggest hospital in the county, we do have significant workforce issues, and I think it's well documented that we've struggled over time to meet some of the constitutional standards. The process that we've been through in the last 6 months is to hold a number of clinical workshops, and we've had over 100 clinicians, managers, colleagues from Health Watch and other special interest groups attending over 25 workshops. We've had it says on the slide, unprecedented level of partnership working. Certainly I've worked in Devon and Cornwall for a long time now, over 30 years, and it's the first time that I can remember where we've had colleagues from all the hospitals and from community services coming together to try and tackle the issues that are set out at the top of the slide. So just if we can turn to what's been reviewed. I'm sorry that doesn't come up very well on there. To begin with, we decided that we needed to review 3 main service areas, and each of those service areas, the lead of the review has been a medical director from one of the acute hospitals. So for urgent and emergency care, Adrian Harris, who's an emergency physician at the Royal Devon and Exeter, has led that review. For stroke, George Thompson, who's the medical director in North Devon, has led that review. And for maternity, paediatrics and neonatology, Rob Dyer, who's the medical director over at South Devon, has led that review. I think important for our context locally is Phil Hughes, who's the medical director at Derriford, chairs the clinical cabinet, which has overseen all of this work. So Phil's role has been to kind of, whilst he's participated in a number of these workshops, Phil chairs the committee that's got the oversight of all of these reviews. So I think it's quite symbolic that we've got medical directors from all the hospitals putting substantial time into chairing these reviews. So what I'll do now, I'll just go through the main recommendations for each of those reviews. I'm happy to take questions as we go, or if you'd like to just questions at the end, then I'll be guided by you. So for urgent and emergency care, we weren't only looking at the delivery of accident and emergency services, we were also looking at how the medical take, so when people are admitted with heart attack, stroke or medical conditions, but also how the surgical take works in all 4 hospitals. Not surprising that the recommendation is that the emergency departments, the medical and surgical takes will remain on all 4 sites. Barnstaple is geographically remote. The average travel time, if you were a patient in North Devon, if you had to go to Exeter, would be over 70 minutes, and that would be unacceptable in an emergency situation. So the recommendation is that we will maintain 24/7 emergency services at all 4 hospitals. That doesn't move away from the problem that there are still significant workforce challenges across the board. So even in our own context here locally, we have a number of junior doctor gaps that support the emergency department, the medical take and the surgical take. And every day we need to make decisions around how we deploy our workforce to make sure that we deliver safe services. So whilst the recommendation is to maintain these services in all 4 sites, the main workforce challenge remains, and we're going to have to try and find a way of working with the deanery, with the universities, collectively to try and make sure that the staff that are deployed in these services in Devon cover all the known gaps. So there's still an issue for this particular service. Just for completeness, we did explore whether it would be possible to only have emergency services in North Devon and South Devon during the daytime and early evening, so close those departments overnight, but we've decided that we wouldn't do that. The travel distances from North Devon, as I've already said, are significant, and South Devon Hospital, they see over 13,000 people a year after 10 o'clock at night, and you couldn't move that volume of patients. Exeter would be the next closest hospital, and there's no way that Exeter would be able to cope with that. So firm decision to keep the departments open, but we need to solve the workforce problem. Sorry, thanks. The decision of the group is that there will be 2 hyperacute stroke units in Devon, 1 in Exeter and 1 in Plymouth. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what that means in terms of staffing levels and so on in a moment. So for the assessment and early treatment of stroke, that will happen in the 4 localities. For the hyperacute stroke phase, which is the first 3 days following your stroke, you will be transferred to either Exeter or Plymouth for the hyperacute care, and then you will go back to your locality for acute stroke care in the hospital. And then if you're suitable for stroke rehab or community services, so that's called early supported discharge, that will happen back in your locality. So the main issues there are for patients from North Devon and South Devon, who in the main will travel to the Royal Devon and Exeter for their hyperacute phase. Sorry, that's not the clearest chart, but that shows you the level of stroke burden in Devon. So you can see that there are approximately 2,400 strokes in Devon every year. The number down at the bottom, there's 737 strokes in the period that we reviewed here in Plymouth, about 700 in Exeter, just under 400 in North Devon and 600 in Torbay. So for the hyperacute phase, those 2,400 strokes will be managed in either Exeter or with ourselves in Plymouth. Now, the other thing we need to remember in our context here in Plymouth, there will be about 150 patients from East Cornwall whose stroke will be managed at Derriford. So you can add another 150 patients to the Derriford workload. Just showing that in a slightly different way. All this chart's trying to show that in terms of the options we considered about hyperacute, should we have 1 unit, which would just be Plymouth, 2 units, which is what the recommendation. There was some discussion as to whether Torbay would have a hyperacute stroke unit, but that's not been recommended. But you can see from that chart, it's the green bar that you're interested in there, is that in option 2, which is, I say, the green bar, the hyperacute strokes will be managed in Plymouth, and the large green column next to the Royal Devon and Exeter Hospital along. Now, there's one other important development that we need to be mindful of, because there are some recent advances in the management of stroke care, and certain patients present in a way that you are able to do a procedure called a thrombectomy, and that's where the clot can be removed from your brain via a procedure. Now, we have the ability to do that at Derriford. We can't do that 24/7 at the moment, so we are offering a limited service. But for those patients, and it's probably somewhere in the region of 10% of all strokes who are appropriate for a thrombectomy, they will come to Derriford, whether they're from North Devon, South Devon or Exeter, or indeed Cornwall, because we will develop over the next couple of years the ability to offer a comprehensive service for thrombectomy. So that's an important development for Plymouth Hospitals Trust in terms of the service that we need to develop, but it's also important for patients in Devon and Cornwall is that they will have local access to thrombectomy. Just a little bit about staffing. What this chart's trying to show, if you look at the 4 columns, the first one's marked as you, the next, so that's hyperacute stroke. The next one is marked as you, that's acute stroke, then rehabilitation unit, and then early supported discharge. These are the national recommendations of the numbers of nurses, doctors and therapists you need to be able to manage patients in those various phases. So there will need to be significant recruitment of additional nurses, some doctors and therapists to Derriford to allow us to be able to manage stroke to the standard that's set out nationally for hyperacute stroke, for acute stroke. The rehab services and early supported discharge sit with Steve's team in Live Well, and again we will need to make sure that the services over at Mount Gould and the services in the community have the requisite numbers of staff consistent with that slide, and I'm sure we can circulate these if people are interested. I appreciate this is a busy slide, but it's important for us to try and work towards those staffing levels to give patients the best outcome from their stroke. You need to remember, I think stroke is the 3rd largest reason for death at the moment, so it's an important disease that needs to be properly managed. You can.
we recognise we've got problems with the workforce. You said that earlier
Yeah.
on. How are we going to find the staff that we need to keep these units
Yes.
up to scratch?
Okay. I'll just talk about Plymouth because I think that's probably more relevant for this committee. The doctors who provide stroke cover at Derriford are neurologists. We have a reasonably big neurology department. We do need to recruit another 1 or 2 neurologists to be able to deliver the twice daily ward round, which is the recommendation, particularly for HASU, that's recommended there. So we're confident that if we advertise, and on the back of this is a significant development for the hospital and for the city, that we should be able to attract good quality neurologists to the team. In terms of nursing and therapists, there are gaps. I mean, we will have to advertise. Again, this is an important development. I expect what will happen, there will be some staff from other wards in the hospital who will want to be part of the HASU development, and there may be staff from Steve's team in the community who may choose to work at Derriford and vice versa. So I haven't got a magic wand. I mean, we're working really hard with the universities to try and make sure that we take as many student nurses as they qualify and so on. But I think what we've got to do in the context of this development is to make sure that everyone understands that this is a huge opportunity for the hospital to deliver first-class stroke services, and hopefully that will go some way to helping attract staff. I don't know whether you want to say anything else.
Thank you, Chair. Just to support Kevin, I think particularly on the nursing front, Plymouth is part of the wider Devon pilot on associate nurse training. So what we've agreed is certainly for this year, we've got the current cohort, but we are looking in September to increase that between us and how we look at skill mix, but also the ability to grow our own as well. So looking at developing healthcare assistants, going back to even individuals at school, looking at work experience placements, and then how do you develop careers in that. So it is, as Kevin was saying, how we go about nationally recruiting, but also how we grow our own and develop the local workforce as well.
I understand what you're saying, but if you're taking them from other parts of the hospital, obviously there'll be gaps there. And I know in the past we've had horrendous problems and we've had to go outside of the country, and are we still sort of like thinking that's the plan, that we might have to advertise sort of like almost worldwide?
So I don't think we've got any active overseas recruitment plans in place at the moment, but we have done, as you're quite correct. I guess you get into a wider debate, don't you, around how our acute beds are used, and do we need the number of acute beds that we've got if we can get everybody into the right setting of care. Dangerous straying into delayed transfers of care and goodness knows what, and I don't think that's probably appropriate for this morning's discussion, but we do need to take stock of what's the right number of acute beds that we need at Derriford, and I suspect we've probably got too many at the moment. I know that it's difficult to understand that when the hospital is full, but I think we need to look at everything in the round, I think is the answer. No, that's fine. So the final area that we reviewed, we specifically wanted to review maternity services, but it's difficult to do that in isolation of paediatrics and neonatology because they're all linked. If you're going to deliver babies on a site, you need paediatricians, and sometimes you need a neonatal unit. So we looked at the 3 areas in the round. So all 4 sites at the moment deliver consultant-led maternity services. All 4 sites have neonatal units, although the tertiary unit is here in Plymouth, and then there are smaller neonatal units in the other hospitals, and we all have paediatric inpatient care. So the recommendations, again, that we've made here is that consultant-led maternity services remain on all 4 hospital sites. The issue, again, is about consultant cover for those. So at Derriford, we have a consultant obstetrician in the hospital 24/7. The other hospitals don't have anything like that level of provision, and there's guidance on the number of births as to how many hours per week you should have covered by consultants. So there is still work to be done on that front in North Devon, Exeter and South Devon. We're lucky that we've got the services that we've got here in the city. The other recommendation is that we should adopt midwifery-led units co-located on the acute sites. So the next slide will bring this into focus. So what we're saying is that if you have midwifery-led units on acute sites, more women would normally choose that option, and there's less chance that you will end up having a caesarean section or some form of intervention. So if you look at the two bars on the chart at the top left there, the one headed preference, that's the pattern of provision for England, where you see 49%, so the middle green component of that, are the percentage of women who deliver in a maternity-led unit on an acute site. For Devon, that figure is 9%, so we're completely out of kilter in Devon with the national picture. And our recommendation is that at Derriford, North Devon and South Devon, we deliver maternity-led wards alongside the consultant-led ward. So if there's an emergency, you've always got the option to move to obstetric-led, consultant-obstetric-led birth or delivery or caesarean section. But in the main, we want to see many, many more women managed on maternity-led wards. Now, in doing that, we're supporting maternity-led units over freestanding maternity units, and there are 4 freestanding maternity units in the county. There's one in Oakhampton, there's one in Tiverton, there's one in Honiton, and there's one in Newton Abbot. And we believe that those services should move to the acute sites. That's not finalised yet, and that will be quite contentious in those localities. And so we've asked we need to develop a local maternity service committee to cover Devon, and we've asked that local maternity service committee to wrestle with that challenge around what we do with the freestanding units in those communities in Devon. But our aim is to try and mirror the national pattern for births, and that would see many, many more women being delivered in maternity-led units on the acute sites. So that's a big development that we need to wrestle with at Derriford. We've got the space, but we'd need to develop that to take that forward. So a significant change in how we will handle maternity services in the city. If I can just then next slide, yeah. Just in terms of the neonatal and paediatric services, there will be no change to the way neonatal services are delivered. What we do need to do, though, is to train more advanced neonatal nurse practitioners, and we're lucky that Plymouth University offer that training, and we certainly send staff from Derriford onto that course. We're trying to encourage colleagues from North Devon, South Devon and Exeter to send more staff onto that programme. The advantage of training more advanced neonatal nurse practitioners is they can act virtually as a junior doctor, so they can go up to, we call it F2 level, so they can cover all the duties and activities that a junior doctor would cover. And when you've got workforce challenges at junior doctor level, the fact that we can substitute with nurses who can undertake the roles quite successfully is an important development. So again, we're recommending that the ANNP programme, and that's delivered here in Plymouth, is supported and that we train more nurses to do that. For paediatrics, we want to try and develop ambulatory care. So many children are sent to the hospital, and with appropriate senior support and access to diagnostics, we can usually manage them and send them home in the same day. And we do that up at the hospital. We want to develop those services in all 4 hospitals across the county. We did consider whether we only had ambulatory paediatric services and no inpatient beds in North Devon and South Devon because of some of the workforce challenges. But again, because of the geography and the way that paediatric services work between acute, community and so on, the decision is to maintain inpatient paediatric beds on all 4 sites. We need to develop ambulatory care, as I've said. There are 2 other things we need to do. One is we need to review paediatric surgery across the county. So do we need to be undertaking paediatric surgery in all 4 hospitals? We will commission a review with the relevant national body to look at that over the coming months. And then we need to address the issue of CAMS. All 4 hospitals have children or adolescents with mental health issues in our acute inpatient beds at any one time, and that's probably not appropriate for some periods of their care. Obviously, if they're admitted with acute needs, then it's right and proper that we put that, that we manage those acute needs. But often patients are delayed in acute inpatient beds for ongoing placement or access to higher tiered CAMS beds, and we need to be more cognizant of that, and we need to have a better plan for the management of those children. Now, I did some work in the last few weeks looking at the burden there, and probably at any one time there are 12 children in Devon who are in an acute bed with a CAMS need, and they don't need to be in an acute bed, and we need to have a better solution for that group. So I haven't got the answer for that, but we do need to keep working with that.
Thank you, Chair. We're really interested in the work that's going on around maternity, paediatric, and the links into CAMS, because of all the work that we've been developing around the integrated children and young people's offer, and the developments that we've been able to get in place around our early help offer and the link into CAMS, because we've been trying to do a lot of work to make sure that we're not seeing children and young people escalating through the system. So if there's any way that we can get any further connection with this piece of work, Kevin, for our local area, be really interested in that. We've got something coming to Children and Young People's Partnership in the System Design Group about our next steps locally. But this is one of the areas the Health and Wellbeing Board asked us to be particularly cognizant of how we move this forward. So anything we can do to link in, because this area has such a significant impact on my service, particularly in the local authority, but in the wider partnership as well. So really welcome what you're saying here, and want to take it on a stage.
You probably saw the light go on when you mentioned the word CAMS over here, because I've been hot under the collar about CAMS referrals since I became a counsellor in 2007. So firstly, I'm hoping that the time to get seen by somebody has lessened somewhat, because it was really excessive over 20 odd weeks when I first started. So I'm hoping that's improved. I'm interested in the topic of the amount of beds that we've got in the city to look after young people with mental health problems who really do need that intervention. Is 12 beds enough?
Sorry, so just to let me explain. So the 12 beds that I was referring to are not only in Plymouth. So we think our estimate, and this is probably a light estimate, is that in the 4 acute hospitals at any one time there will be about 12 children who are waiting for onward placement for their mental health needs. In the recent weeks, we've had as many as 8 up at Derriford who are waiting for onward placement. We need to do more analysis of the numbers of children waiting and the reasons that they're waiting, and I think that will be the next step in terms of this work that we will undertake. And I think where the work will be placed, as Carol said, is the acute service review probably isn't the best route to do that work. If you can remember the chart right at the beginning of the presentation, there is a children and young people's work stream to the STP, which Jo Olsen, who's Carol's counterpart in Devon, is chairing, and we probably need to place that work there. There's also a mental health work stream, which is chaired by Melanie Walker, who's the Chief Exec of Devon Partnership Trust, and between those 2 work streams we need to get an expert group looking at CAMS, what the issues are, and what the the disease burden is, I think.
Thank you. I also think that with mental health issues, the early intervention is vital, and I can see the city are doing a lot of work with young people on that front, which I'm pleased to see. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Just to finalise, so there are those 3 big services, and I've just given you the headline recommendation. There are other services which we've badged them vulnerable. It's probably not the right title, but where there are significant workforce challenges. So the example I'll use there is ENT, where North Devon last year had no consultant cover for the hospital. So the Royal Devon and Exeter has been providing that for over a year and will continue to provide that because we need to maintain outpatient and audiology services in North Devon Hospital. So there are a number of services, histopathology, ENT, neurology, where there's work ongoing in the county to try and better collaborate between the 4 hospitals to share the burden of work and to share the workforce. So there's a common theme again, workforce, in all of this. And then our plan is to review a number of other services, and they're set out at the bottom bullet points. So breast surgery, dermatology, interventional cardiology, and interventional radiology.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's going back to CAMS. I was wondering if you'd looked at transitional from child services to adult services, because I get a lot of anecdotal evidence that there's a stop-off point and then it takes quite a time for adult services to take up the case, and people feel they're having to explain their cases all over again, and there's a kind of, I've heard of 18 months delay between one service and the other. So I just wondering whether you've taken up that, and you know, it is from residents that contact me and explain that's their experience.
So in terms of the review work that we've done, we've not looked at that issue, but you know, I've worked in healthcare for a long time. I'm very conscious of the fact that transition from you know, children's services through to adult services is a constant problem. And I don't know, Steve, whether you can comment, because you've got some of those services.
Okay, going back to CAMS as well. So picking up Ian's point in terms of the transition, there is a clear protocol in place so that where a child is anticipated to transition between children's services and adult services in the 6 to 9 months before that is due to happen, there is a case conference held where individuals are identified. We use the same clinical system in Plymouth, so that information is shared from children's services across to adult services. So that process is already in place, and where there are opportunities to improve on that, those are picked up at individual case conferences. So there is a clear system, and we'd be happy to pick up any concerns of individuals outside of this meeting that come to light. Going back to CAMS, so the inpatient provision, Plymouth, the CCG invested a sum of money last year in expanding the community outreach team, the COT team, which provides acute and crisis support for the city. On average, there is 1 or 2 children in the 12-bedded CAMS unit that we call at Plimbridge House, which is different to Devon and Cornwall, where those services aren't in place in the community. Equally, that COT team does provide in-reach services. We had an on-call arrangement prior to the additional team being put in place, but there is an in-reach service into Derriford to provide advice and support to those individuals. Kevin's right in saying what we experience and what Derriford experiences is that onward placement. So if an individual needs a complex social care placement outside of Plymouth, that can be a barrier to early discharge. And equally, the transition from a bed or place of safety admission to a tier 4 unit when our unit is full, again, is a problem. There are plans in place that NHS England have got, so there are additional beds being opened up in Devon and Cornwall. I think there's plans in 2 years' time to open a 12-bedded CAMS unit down there, but we are in that interim phase where onward placement of individuals appropriately for secure and general tier 4 CAMS is an issue for us, despite the fact we've got the 12 beds in Plymouth.
Yeah, my question was around the paediatric assessment, but more around the forensic side for care incidents. We've had an issue recently whereby across the peninsula we've had a lack of forensic paediatric capability, and I just wondered, in terms of your proposals to expand the ambulatory paediatric assessment, whether that is likely to feed into that as well.
We've not considered that, so if we need to discuss that outside the meeting, that might be the best route, but that's certainly not been part of any discussion that we've had.
Mine, I guess, is a little bit more general.
just in the presentation, the questions are interesting. I guess what I just have a sense of is that coming to the meeting, I would find it much more helpful if we had some structure to the way things were being presented around how it affects the wider strategy, where it fits with other things, so that we're not just having those questions here. Because while it's very interesting, it doesn't give the ability to think about those broader implications before you come to the meeting as individual partners. So I'd just like some structure so that we maybe set some questions for people who are coming that helps us see where it fits with the broader strategy that we have, the implications we have for different strands of that, and where this fits into us understanding where we're making a choice, a difference, an input of funding. It would certainly help my thinking. I don't know how others feel about that.
Yeah, I think actually what your comments you're making are very fair, and I think we need to make a note of that and through sort of like Ross to see how we can actually put that into practice. Because Craig?
I think that's a good point, John. I think what you'll find today is quite a lot of the presentations are scene setting, which will guide our work as a Health and Wellbeing Board over the next 12, 18 months and onwards, really. They are very much scene setting. So there's a presentation on the STP and then one on accountable care systems, which will direct our workload. So I think it's a fair challenge. And I think after this meeting, it will start shaping our agendas going forwards as well. Just on this particular one, I think it's absolutely vital that it's brought here. Acute services across Devon are under incredible pressure, both in terms of the workforce challenges, which Kevin's really clearly articulated. Demand on those services are absolutely intense. And then there are some system pressures, such as delayed transfers of care. And I think we should note at this point that there was an announcement last week that Plymouth would be one of the areas which is subject to a CQC review, targeted review around delayed transfers of care. And although the details are emerging on that, that will be absolutely important that we bring back to this group as well. So I fully accept your points, but this is really important and will direct our work going forwards.
Hi, I'd just like to give some Health Watch reflections on the levels of public engagement and public consultation. And I think with regard to this process, it's been both comprehensive and meaningful. There's been largely 3 stages, and one is, I'm very pleased to see this, engagement before the search for proposals begins, to see what the public thinks the issues are and to make the public aware of what some of the challenges are. And I think that's very helpful for the further stages. Public have been actively involved in developing proposals, and then the third stage in consulting upon those proposals. And Health Watch is quite clear that there's evidence of the public being properly engaged and that the proposals have built in and considered the public voice and acted upon that public voice. We're very pleased to see that as part of this process, and we'll be very pleased to see that built upon for the remainder of the STP work streams.
Thank you very much. I think that's always encouraging, because sometimes members of the public seem to appear that they're left out of the loop and they're actually the people that are most important.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering if Anne could help us in terms of what it sounds to me like we're hearing is that, on the whole, this is positive news for Plymouth and its residents. Because it sounds like what you're saying to us is there are a number of areas where we will have either the same that we've got already or enhanced services, and that linking it to what John was saying, John's I think what you're saying to us, John, is we've got a vision for this Health and Wellbeing Board, and we've got a strategy that we're following, and that strategy was about improving the health and wellbeing of our population, and part of that was making sure that we had excellent and outstanding services in the city with the right access for people of this city and the neighbourhood. Now, I think within all of this, that what we're saying is that for Plymouth residents, there is some potentially quite useful information around what it means for us. And in addition, what it's saying is there is a pressure for us around workforce that we may need to think about as a wider panel, because if we want that excellent services, we've got to have the right workforce here. And so I'm just wondering if that would help us link where we're trying to get to with our health and wellbeing direction and what this presentation is saying us, and whether there's anything within that either Anne or Kevin might like to help us with.
Yeah, so I'm happy to just try and give a response to some of those issues. So I think what we've got really strongly established across the city, which is, John, part of the, as you pointed out, the city strategy, is about doing everything to promote health and wellbeing. And the hospital needs to play and does play a very key part in that. Colleagues will heard me talk before or previously about the award-winning health and wellbeing work we do with our own employees. So we've got 6,500 staff, and promoting their health and wellbeing because they've got families, they live in communities, is really, really important. But in terms of the hospital and where we are, I think we're really fortunate that we have the tertiary hospital for Devon and Cornwall on our doorstep. And while we won't always get everything right, we should absolutely acknowledge that those services are nationally recognised as being outstanding, not only in terms of the care that they provide from CQC, but also some of the clinical leadership and international reputations those clinicians have. So part of what you've heard this morning is building on that even more because the foundations are very clearly established. So having the main health provider in the city also providing those services to a bigger footprint across the peninsula is really good for the economic outlook of the city. That's really important. The workforce is our biggest challenge. I worry about the workforce much more than I worry about the debt at PHNT. And I think we've got a whole lot of things that we are working on collaboratively to grow our own staff of the future. So the work experience, the apprenticeship schemes, the fact that a number of us work with schools to really positively promote the very diverse range of careers you can have in healthcare. You don't just have to be a nurse or a doctor. We're also leading the way around new models of care and the workforce, and a lot of that work is with the university. Again, really important to build the profile of the city. So Steve's referred to the nursing associates, but we're doing physicians associates, doctors assistants, all of the things that are getting national interest in terms of what we're doing. Some of the things that the acute services in particular start to bring, though, is they make Plymouth a really attractive place to come and work as well, and with that comes some of the research opportunities. And again, I was in London yesterday just talking about the research that our fabric of services can offer, and people want to come and work here, especially if they're consultants and nurses, AHPs, allied health professionals, because we've got really great services, strong sense of community, but a good basis on which to develop and drive innovation. So I think all of that completes the circle of promoting health and wellbeing, delivering excellent services, but also developing our people to really want to stay and develop as a place to work and live. So it absolutely supports the city strategy, I think, on every front.
Yeah, just quickly really, and again I think we would all echo that, and we know what great services we have, but it's about this board and its legitimacy in terms of what it's doing, and having something as simple as a section where we have challenges, opportunities and benefits around each of the areas, because it's those messages that we want to get out, that we understand what we want people, both in our broader workforce and the wider public, to see what's happening here and to recognise the benefit that this board brings.
Right, I'm going to sort of close this item now, but I think what Ross and I are sensing we've got out of this, the recommendation is the Health and Wellbeing Board notes the initial recommendations from the review and agrees that further information on any consultation and final proposals should be provided to the board when appropriate. And also sort of wondering whether we either put it on the next agenda or we have an informal meeting so as we actually review and have a look at what's in the strategy within the Plymouth plan. So do you want it on the next item on the next agenda, or do you want an informal meeting just so let's set up for that?
Can we start with an informal meeting, Chair, and then if we feel it's necessary to bring it back to full board, bring it back?
I think that's fair, and then obviously if people tonight don't want to contribute for whatever reason or can't, then we'll do that. So I'll leave it over to you. Next item on the agenda is the wonderful STP plan update. Who's going to give us the update? Carol?
We do a double act again now. It's the same.
Just to make sure that we keep the STP in context, so this is the Sustainability and Transformation Plan, which is both the work and bringing together the work of the health service, health and care services, with the local authorities across Devon. So when I refer to Devon, I'm really saying Plymouth, Devon and South Devon. So it's under that banner. It'll just save me saying the three as we go along. So sustain STPs, if we move on to the next slide, thank you. So they've been introduced nationally. There are 44 STPs covering the whole of England, and it's really a way of planning what the future direction needs to be for the pattern of services and the needs of their local populations. And what we know, of course, is that the health and care services face a number of very, very significant challenges. And while we're very proud of the NHS, I am certainly, we know that some of the current challenges around demographic change, the burden of ill health, is really, really testing us and social care beyond our resources. And by that, I mean money and the people that we've got. So clearly we need to think of something different. So we've had an STP in place for over a year, and certainly others have presented at this board the case for change, which is called Shaping Future Care. So if you go nationally, what we know is if we don't do anything else, if we just project forward, then the challenge of how much we are spending nationally and how much we're receiving will give us a national challenge of about £30 billion worth of debt by 2020. At one point, 2020 seemed a very long way away. It doesn't feel that far away now. And I think the problem, as it's identified there, is clearly something that we need to address, and that's the national problem. But of course, one size doesn't fit all nationally. We have to really bring it back to our different needs across the city of Plymouth, rural Devon, South Devon, and some of the health inequalities that we know that we've got. So the case of change, which has been shared through the health and wellbeing boards at a more local level, starts to pull out some really important but quite alarming statistics, I think. So we know at the moment our population is living longer, which is great, but they're not living always healthier lives. And we know that we've got 1 in 3 living with a long-term condition. We know that 2 out of 3 people, when they come to their end of life, would rather be able to die at home, but actually only 1 in 4 are able to do so. And we know, and I know this board has been very focused on this, that there's 15 years difference in life expectancy across some areas. And that, I think, is a statistic we'd all very much like to change. And certainly for Plymouth, there's massive pressure around primary care. And Sheila will know as well as anybody that at the moment we're looking at a number of practices, GP practices, that are really struggling to meet the demand with the numbers of doctors that they have got, and community services that support them to meet those needs. And we are, as NHS and social care partners, all working very hard together to try and make sure that we support primary care, because if we don't, they're only going to come to the hospital. So it's right in terms of early intervention and support, that we develop our model and support for primary care. And locally across Devon, if we do nothing else, then we're going to rack up a debt of £550 million. And that simply isn't sustainable. So we've got to think about how we're going to do this differently. Now, some of the areas that we've been looking at, I mean, Kevin has just given an update around stroke, maternity, children's services, because we know part of what's driving our challenges and costs is we just don't have enough staff in all of the hospitals, can't recruit them to really sustain the current pattern of services. We know that we spend less money in the deprived areas than in other areas. That can't be right. We've got to address that. And we know that over nearly 100,000 people across Devon have got long-term mental health challenges. But we do know that we don't spend as much on mental health right the way through from early intervention and support right the way through when you're acutely unwell as we need to. So we've got to start moving the money around to get to the right place, but we've also, in doing that, got to stop some of the increase in costs. And one of the key areas is at any one point across the whole of Devon, we've got 600 people in hospital beds who don't need to be there. That's not to say they don't need some ongoing care, but they don't need to be in a hospital bed and everything that goes with that. And we talked earlier to the real challenges we've collectively got around the delayed transfers of care, which would be a very good example of that. And how we work with the care home sector is really important. And I think Plymouth is in a stronger position than other parts of Devon. That's not just about the relationships and the networks, but it's some of the approaches to social care, which has been really important. And I think that's what we need to start thinking about collectively in terms of our future strategy. So they're all the organisations that are signed up and actively participate in the STP. I think it's fair to say that nationally we're recognised as one of the most inclusive STPs, and we've had really good support from our council colleagues, both in Plymouth, but Devon and Torbay as well. And that's really helped us bring together the needs of the population, all of the different challenges, and how we might support this with staff and money. And I think that takes a very holistic approach. And I know that that's been a real commitment here around integrating care around the needs of individuals. That feels absolutely the right place to go. So in terms of what the STP will do, it's working together to say, have we really got the best model of care in place to now meet the needs of our populations? And does that really start to promote early intervention, support, and promoting health and well-being? And how do we make sure that we develop new models of care, but also new workforces to make them more sustainable than we've got? So we've got 3 guiding principles: absolutely improving health and well-being, delivering safe, high-quality care, but also, and importantly, making sure that we can provide cost-effective care. It's really important that that is not the first priority, but obviously we cannot continue, as they would say nationally, to spend other people's money. So this, given the scale of debt that we would have by 2021, 5.5 million, we've got to do something pretty different. This isn't just about reshaping a few things at the edges. We've got to really think, and I think there's huge opportunity within that. Importantly, we're now making sure that mental health is as important as physical health, and we've got to really make sure we work in partnership with our citizens to really promote independence and well-being, and making sure that the best bed is your own bed is a really good starting point, rather than providing bed-based care through health and care sector. Now, the money is a real challenge, and it is an immediate challenge. I think the workforce is a bigger challenge. this process is ongoing, so I think this is where we are at the moment. This is not yet concluded, and this involves predominantly the NHS organisations and the clinical commissioning groups. So what we've done collectively, because at the moment we are in a collective debt position, the plan that we submitted in December moves the whole of Devon to a financially balanced position over 3 years, and that would require us to deliver a debt of 78 million this year, 36 million next year, with finally 2019-20 in a break-even position. And that's to make sure that we can do all the thinking, the planning, the collaboration, the engagement to redesign services that couldn't and shouldn't be done quickly. But nationally, they've asked us to accelerate these plans and to really accelerate what we would call large-scale service redesign. And that has been, I think it's fair to say, a very challenging position for all of the organisations. So to just give you an example, Derriford Hospital has got a £40 million improvement plan for this year on a turnover of about 450 million. The only way I could increase that plan would be to do some very radical things, and that would only have a major and detrimental impact, in my view, on all the other services that are sat around this table. And so we've got to just try and maintain the partnership to make those changes. So the STP is still in discussion and negotiation with the regulators of NHS England and NHS Improvement about what the plan is. But at the moment, we're working on the plan that has been set there. So as Kevin said earlier, we've got the 7 priorities. Now, you'll all be very familiar with the service priorities. I think they really well reflect and mirror our local plan that we've taken forward through the commissioning strategies that Carol referred to earlier. The one that feels a bit clunky in that is productivity. And just to give you an example of that, there's some national work called the Lord Carter Review. Derriford Hospital is very actively engaged at the most senior levels on that work. And it starts to look at things like supplies. So, good example, if you look nationally in the NHS, at surgical gloves, for example, we go through hundreds and hundreds of thousands of surgical gloves in the NHS, but we all buy slightly different ones. And what they're saying is if you standardise on both the quality and the use of those products, then you can negotiate a better price. So a really good business model that doesn't compromise patient care, but it really does drive costs out of the system. And we had a minister down last week just looking at what we're doing in terms of productivity. While there's still plenty to go at, we're making good progress on that. So they're really important. How do we start to share support services, back office function, corporate services? What can we do better together and take some costs out of the system? So we've made really good progress in the last year, 18 months as an STP. We have already across Devon made savings of over £66 million, and we're starting to make some inroads into the performance of our health and care services. Still a long way to go, and in Plymouth we are particularly challenged around the 4-hour A&E target, the referral to treatment targets, and making sure everybody gets their right tests at the right time. We're working with primary care to make sure that we support primary care, so only patients who are referred to the hospital need to really be at the hospital. And Kevin's talked a little bit about acute services, and there have been across Devon, although it didn't really significantly impact on Plymouth because of our model of care. the two major public consultations around community-based integrated care. So I think we're going to come on and talk in a moment about accountable care systems, but clearly, just given the workforce, the demand pressures and the financial pressures we've already highlighted, there's a lot more work for us to do across the STP to deliver the balanced position, and services being in the right balance as well. So if we sort of bring that bigger Devon picture down to what we've been doing locally, I think we've got really good architecture in place. We've got a good leadership team led by Tracy Lee called the Taking Change Forward group. That starts to really bring some of the key messages from the STP into our local context. We've got our Plymouth and Western Delivery Board, which involves a number of people sat around the table to really start to drive performance and improvement. And in terms of the services that we have in place on our doorstep, I think, while there's always more to be done, I think we should be really proud of those. We've got an integrated community, social care and mental health provider with Live Well South West. We've got a very, very highly regarded tertiary hospital, and together we're doing a lot of work with primary care, but also how we now start to take those steps along the path that's already been set around health and wellbeing and integrated care, and what does that mean for the future.
So Anne and I had the privilege of already running through this at an overview and scrutiny previously, so we've done this a couple of times now. I think for this board, just being able to bring the context together around the things that we then need to be considering at the Health and Wellbeing Board. The points Anne raised from that case for change around the items that were in there around things like the 15 years life expectancy difference and the issues around whether or not less money was spent on health and social care. I think if we go back to our original business cases that were signed off by this board now 3 years ago about the direction of travel, you would find that many of the things in the case for change for the whole of Devon are ones we highlighted 3 years ago that we wanted to work on. So we felt very confident when those of us who were at the STP meetings, we felt very confident that the work the STP are suggesting need to be done already matched the work that this board had been leading us towards. I think two things from there that we just need to highlight is, one, that the primary care issue is probably more advanced in terms of issues that we've got than we realised 3 years ago. So I think that has probably come greater to the fore, and Sheila may want to pick up on a bit of that. The other one is that Anne mentioned on the care home sector, the difference in terms of the work that Craig and the commissioning team do with our care home domiciliary care sector and the demands that we put into that system are very different to how Devon and Torbay are in their system. Although if you ask Craig, he would still say it's a very difficult situation, but ours is far more vibrant and buoyant than many other places. Lots to do there, though. So that's one thing that you may just want to be thinking about. What are the differences for Plymouth in this system, and where do we need to put our attention? Second thing was on that slide that Anne introduced around the aims of the STP. I think if you go back to those again, linked to the business cases and the strategies that we looked at 3 years ago, I think we were already saying that those were the things we needed to focus on around improving health and well-being, safe and high quality care and cost effective. But what we all put at the centre of that was the integration journey. And so again, I think we've all felt quite confident that the direction of the STP matches the direction this board set us. The finances clearly are very, very difficult. When you move on then to the 7 work streams, I think the work you signed off in terms of the integrated commissioning strategies 2 years ago at the point we brought together all of the commissioning money, I think you will find through those commissioning strategies most of the areas that are down as priorities. But I think the board needs to think about, in the light of where we are with the case for change and the pressures we've currently got, do we have the right attention in our commissioning strategies now and the plans that we're putting in place to deliver the outcomes that we're going to have to? And is that the push that the board wants us to have? And then the final bit would be around our progress locally and what we do next. We've got another item on the agenda around accountable care delivery systems, which Craig will take us through. But the issue for us now has got to be, have we got the right plans in place to deal with all of the things that we're talking around, the pressures around delayed transfers, the issues we've got around primary care, mental health, all of those issues, are those plans right? And then is the organisational form and the way we design ourselves going to take us to the next stage to meet the board's requirements? And then finally, I think it's the issue that John keeps taking us back to really is, if we really truly are a health and wellbeing board, how do we make sure that all of the work around early intervention and prevention and all of the work that goes on in the communities is accelerating at the pace we need, that we're dealing with the issues and the pressures in health at the same time as preparing ourselves to make sure we deliver a service that is fit for the future? And I think that's a dilemma this board's going to have to constantly look at. So I hope that's helpful to just help our conversation.
I almost don't know where to start really with primary care. So I will try not to monopolise, but just to say that, first of all, a bit of context. It is a national issue. There is a national shortage of GPs and practice nurses. That is multifactorial. In Plymouth, everything feels like it's just aggravated and accelerated and amplified, I suppose, and we've had several practices that have handed back their contracts over the last 18 months or so. Those NHS England has tried to go out to procurement unsuccessfully. So there's an interim solution in place. They're going to need to go out to procurement again. Nothing's really changed in terms of the situation, so we don't know how well that will go. We've got another practice that again has gone down from something like 14 GPs to 5 GPs now. The level of support is really amazing. I think it's been an unprecedented, probably nationally, degree of support in terms of PHT support, Live Well, Plymouth City Council, all of our organisations really. And so we are trying to support them as best as we can. But we also are fighting a retirement bulge. So we've got a lot of GPs in the city that are over 55. We know already, also from a piece of work that John Campbell at the University of Exeter did, something like, I think it's a third of GPs are planning to retire in the next 5 years. That will impact directly on Plymouth as well. Then we've got a lot of practice nurses, also in their 50s who are planning to take retirement, in some cases early, not necessarily for all of them. Who knows how Brexit will impact? We really don't know what the impact that's going to have on our workforce. So there are a lot of challenges, and combine that with the fact that if in an ideal world we wouldn't be planning to increase our stroke services because stroke is largely preventable. So actually, if we could get our acts together, we would be talking about downsizing stroke. We're not going to stop people having babies, of course, so we will still need to beef up our maternity provision and children as well. But yeah, so we need to bear in mind that that work needs to happen in primary care and in the community. And I'm going to stop there because I really could ramble on.
Thanks, Chair. I think Sheila's picked up on a really important point. If we go back a number of years, I don't think the organisations would have come together to support each other in the way that we've worked together in supporting primary care, and I think that has been a really good and positive testing ground for future model development. So we're not just reliant on doctors delivering services, it's the full range. So talk about Derriford using some of the specialist physiotherapy to look at back, knee, joints, whatever pains. Some of our mental health teams are going in to do triage within the practice on a regular daily basis. Different models. I think this has been a good testing ground, but also I think has shown how we can positively work together, and it puts us in a really strong position going forward.
I do feel that there is hope, absolutely, and I think in some ways I hope that by working together we'll actually be able to innovate quite significantly. We've got some plans around social prescribing which will support primary care as well, and I think if we can accelerate that across the city, that would be a real ray of hope, I think.
Questions from anybody? Any comments? No? Okay. All right, I think what we need to do, the recommendation here is obviously we need to sort of keep having updates, any proposals for service changes and things obviously we need to bring here, and we need to make sure we are aligned to the health and wellbeing strategy in the Plymouth Plan. I'm afraid the Plymouth Plan keeps coming back, but we'll be looking at that at the next informal meeting. Can we now go on to the alternative care delivery system, please? Craig?
Is very much thank you, Carol. Is very much an early introduction to what is what we would say developing an emerging area of work that we're involved with, and it can appear quite conceptual at this stage, but I think we absolutely have to be clear that this is really going to accelerate system working and complete place-based integration as well. So it's really vitally important that Health and Wellbeing Board is aware of this and supports the direction of travel around this, because it will fundamentally change the way that services are potentially ordered and commissioned and delivered going forwards. So what are accountable care systems? As you will well know, the 5-year forward view, which was published in October 14, talked a lot about new models of care. When the next steps was announced in March 17, that had moved on to talking about accountable care systems, and Simon Stevens on the back of that has announced 8 pilot areas who will be taking forward some of the models. Although Devon isn't one of those areas, it is absolutely keen to accelerate some of these changes. And so Simon Stevens has said it is about embarking on the biggest national move to integration of care of any major Western country. So it is a fundamental change to the way that health and care and wellbeing services are delivered within a system. And it's classed as what they call an evolved version of an STP that is working as a locally integrated health system. Now, we can say we recognise much of that already, and some of the conversations today have absolutely been about us working as one system. But I think we have to be clear that this goes much further than that, and that, for me, there's a phrase in there where partners, including local authority, health, choose to take on clear collective responsibility. And for me, that's absolutely key to this, is working absolutely as one system, sharing risk, sharing budgets, sharing the workforce, and absolutely pulling in those key elements of the system which are presently out of that system, such as primary care, really wedding that in far more closer than before as well. So it can feel at this stage very much akin to what we've got, but it is a significant step forwards as well. And if you took the journey onwards from an accountable care system, there's also then talks of an accountable care organisation. And just to read that, this is where the commissioners in that area have a contract with a single organisation for the great majority health and care services for population in their area. And I think you can go on further, and the King's Fund has done a lot of work on this, which says it brings together a number of providers to take on responsibility for the cost and quality of care for a defined population within an agreed budget. So that would take our integration journey on yet another stage further. And an accountable care organisation would take many different forms, such as fully integrated systems to looser alliances. The model of care isn't defined, but that ambition to create an organisation who really truly manages that budget and the health of the population is really important. There has been models internationally around this as well, which has proven to derive real system benefits, certainly around preventing admissions and being far more cost effective as well. Evidence-based within England is still emerging, but certainly internationally it feels the way forwards as well. So I don't probably need to go in a great deal about this because it's absolutely been the substance of our conversations today. We've still got some significant challenges around the workforce, around primary care, around the financial challenges. We cannot stand still. We need to go further and faster and deeper with our integration journey at the moment than we're doing. And we feel that an accountable care system would give us that opportunity to do so. So the approach in Devon at this stage is we are at those early conversations as system leaders, and Anne's already referenced the Taking Change Forward group, which consists of a number of partners within this room who are working this through and trying to model it up. And although at an early stage, we've already said what we need for the system is a single strategic commissioner, which would be across the pan-Devon area, so that would be Devon and Torbay as well, that whole STP, which would set out the direction of travel, allocate capitation-based budgets to local areas, and really then set those outcomes that places would work towards. And then they've also set out the vision that there should be a number, yet to be defined, agreed, it should be said, of accountable care systems within the Devon footprint with responsibility and accountability for local populations. Our view is that there absolutely needs to be a Western-based ACDS within that configuration as well, and the local leaders are really pushing quite hard for that, and I'm sure Carol and Anne and Steve will have views on that, as will Sheila, who's also part of those discussions as well. And then an accountable care system for mental health services. And that will cause some surprise within this room because mental health services is very much locally based at the moment as well. But this is very much around those specialist services and how we actually provide those across the piece as well. Linking back to that sustainability agenda that Kevin referenced earlier as well, we really need to make sure that we've got sustainable services going forward. And as a result of that, partners have agreed to establish 5 work streams to look at the options in far more detail and work those up as we're going forwards as well. So that is a very brief introduction to accountable care systems. But I think we just need to spend some time reflecting on what it means for the Health and Wellbeing Board, and in particular, does it support your vision, our vision of that integrated system of health and well-being? We believe it does, but it's worthwhile testing and discussing. And then going forwards, I do believe this will be a significant change for the Western locality. How would the Health and Wellbeing Board like to be involved, and what is their role going forwards within these developments?
Do you add anything to that?
I think Craig's given you a really useful introduction. It's clear from our conversations across wider Devon that there is support at this stage for a Plymouth and Western system. I think one of the things that we constantly talk about is how do we manage the flow around the system, because if you look at what Anne provides through PHNT, then that obviously also brings in people from South East Cornwall. So we're very aligned to how do you manage South East Cornwall, Plymouth, South Hams and West Devon. We've already got situations where Livewell are delivering integrated health and care for Plymouth, but they deliver health service, community health service for South Hams and West Devon already. So we've been talking a lot almost about the messy boundaries we work within, and the fact that actually we have to work constantly across boundaries and do the right thing for our population. So one of the things we've been talking about, which I personally have found really helpful to try and understand what this board's role might be, is that for people who live in this city, Plymouth residents, that we should be looking at what services at the lowest level we've got available to wrap around people in their communities And that includes housing, it includes what the police do, it includes what the voluntary and community sector do, it includes all of those primary care services and then the more statutory services wrapping around. But for some of those people, at some times, they need a specialist support. That might mean they go into Derriford because they might need cancer treatment, neurological services, one of those sorts of things. They might need something like a tier 4 place for children that we talked about this morning. That might take them out of the city. They might need a specialist mental health service. That might take them out of the city. But they always come back to the place that they live in and is their base. And that our job here at the Health and Wellbeing Board is thinking about what is right for our residents and what do we want in place, and to make sure that the specialist services that people go out to receive are also in place. And that's why I think it's wider than just health and care. Because if you go down to that very, very lowest place-based level, it brings in all the services we've got in the room with us. That's why I think it's really important for this board to have a view about the direction of travel.
Really large stuff, isn't it? I think the important thing as a board, and I always get a bit confused between what scrutiny does and what this board does. But I think it would be important that we would be in at the beginning to shape this, rather than has happened in the past when things happen to us. So I would kind of throw open to debate whether we need a subgroup to be looking at this. So we have the opportunity to put a Plymouth view on shaping it, rather than, because it's so large and so complex, I think we need to have a true understanding of it. So I would suggest that this board perhaps commission a smaller group to keep reporting back to this board, looking at the impact and the progress. Thank you.
Quite an interesting thing, and it might be something we could do jointly with scrutiny, because it's important that the scrutiny panel sort of like have the same understanding as well. I don't know what people think about it.
I think what Carol said is really important. In my experience, the more complex and geographically broad the plans are, the more important it is to understand how it affects individual communities and individuals within those communities. And I think if I look at the way we manage troubled families in Greenwich, we started by looking at individuals and what they needed, and then we looked at how that fit with the broader, wider strategic plans, because it's easy to forget that. And when you work out how those broader services impact on an individual, you make more sense of them. So I think that's a piece of work that would be useful for us to do within Plymouth, is just to understand in the areas where we've got very specific problems that we're aware of, that we map what that kind of local living community response is, what services are there, how quickly can someone get access to them, what does it mean for that individual living in any settle in wherever. And I think that would be a valuable piece of work, because otherwise you don't have the right information and evidence feeding into those broader plans, and that local voice gets lost within the complexity of the challenge.
I think I'd agree very fully with what John and particularly Ian has said, in terms of if it's a significant initiative, get involved at an early stage, and I think that would be in the best interest of the people of Plymouth. But I think some of the potentials in this initiative are very much aligned to much of the feedback that we get when we go out to talk to members of the public. And I've just listed 4 that I think are important that we could possibly address. And one is the opportunities to develop seamless services and work in cohesion and not in competition. Secondly, I think it's to keep the monies that we've got, and they're increasingly limited, as close to the point of delivery of services to patients and people as possible. The third is something that comes across very, very clearly when we talk to members of the public about the importance of prevention and early intervention. Nobody wants to use the specialist services if it can possibly be avoided, so to address those. And finally, one that probably isn't implicit in what the explicit rather in what the public tell us, but is implicit, is the benefits of economies of scale of looking at things over a wider area. So I think there's all those potentials in this initiative, and I would urge this group to take the opportunity of engaging with them at an early stage, as Ian suggested.
Well, with your agreement, I'd like to take forward this subgroup. I think it's important, and really, anybody willing to be part of that subgroup. My personal view is perhaps it would be good if there were, I'm not excluding people from health, but people outside of health, because, you know, in a way, like Anne and Carol are involved on a more regular, deeper level. And we really need to know from ground level, if you like, what's going on. Any volunteers?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to volunteer to do that, partly because I think we've got a huge resource with the workforce that we have, people who were passionate about, care about, understand and know their communities and what resources are there. And I don't think this should be a complex piece of work. It should be about capturing what we already know and bringing that to the table fairly quickly, rather than getting into some long sustained administrative bureaucratic process, which we tend to do sometimes.
So I'm sure from Public Health we would love to be part of that and support that, and I'm sure Ruth or one of our consultants will definitely like to be on.
Yes, I certainly want to be a part of it because I think it's so important. You know, I'm normally very negative about cuts to services and rationalisation, but I view this as being so important because there isn't the cavalry coming over the hill. We have to deal with what we've got, and I think the experience of integrating the fund together, we've got to take people with us, and that takes a lot of belief and enthusiasm. And if you don't believe in it, don't volunteer to be part of it. Really believe in improving the services. So that's why I want to be part of it, because I see the positivity involved in it. You know, it's not the world I want to be in, but it's the world we are in, and I think it's up to us to make the best of it.
I think that's a fair comment. Nick?
I was just going to suggest that Healthwatch would welcome being involved either as a participant to reflect the views that we get back from the public, or as an observer to ensure that there is engagement with the public.
We've probably got enough to actually kick off this subgroup, and I'll throw it back to Ross to set something out and get some dates out to now we know who's involved. And I think we ought to speak to the chair of the Wellbeing Board as well, because see if there's anyone from the scrutiny. I know Ian sits on both sides, but there might be other members of scrutiny that want to be involved. All right. I'm wondering at this stage, we haven't quite scheduled it, but I'm wondering actually at this stage whether Craig would like to share some of the plans that we have for the money that was allocated to us in the budget for the £11 million to help with transforming, if you like, the system that we've got to help.
Crikey, on the spot on that one. I feel like Anne now earlier, when she was put on the spot from Carol.
I do appreciate throwing it at you when we haven't got the paperwork, but just to give us some idea.
I will try and do something off the top of my head, so I will do my best. So the plans are this year. The first element of the funding is in the region of £5 million, and we've taken the approach that a significant amount of that funding absolutely needs to go on supporting the NHS and our collective responsibilities around that as a system. So quite a lot of the focus is on around two main areas, which is avoiding admissions and then delays, transfers of care, how we improve discharges. And for me, there's quite a lot on that about how we increase the volume around 7-day working as well. So it feels a real important thing that the system doesn't stop over the weekend, and that's been part of the problem. And then some of the admissions avoidance schemes, we're looking at areas around where there are high areas of presentation, such as alcohol admissions, but also what's the impact on primary care and how we can boost those as well, and also care homes, how we can further develop care homes as well. So that's quite a chunk of the 5 million. I think it's in the region of £3 million allocated to those areas. The schemes are still being worked up and developed, etc., but that's the indicative areas that we've headed for. There's some absolutely in the region of £1 million focused around helping the local care markets as well to develop around that as well. And then we've allocated a chunk to what I would call lower level prevention services as well. So things like social prescribing, which we think is hugely important, the health and wellbeing hubs, and those elements as well that we've established. And also crucially important around that is keeping people safe and keeping adults safe within the city. So we've allocated quite an element of that as well. So those are the broad themes. Within those plans, because the funding reduces over the 3-year period, it goes something like 5.2, 5.3, down to 3.6, and then down to 1.8. We've also built in some spend to save initiatives as well, where we can absolutely reduce packages of care and reinvest elsewhere as well. So that's built into the system as well. So that's a broad overview off the top of my head.
I'm sorry to throw that at you, but I just thought the board might like to know, you talked about the CQC doing an inspection, and although they sort of like overlap and work together, so I just thought a quick update might just at least give the board some reassurance that we're not just sat there and thinking what we can do with this money. We have got plans.
Yeah, I wonder if I could just make a link to those plans. And obviously Craig has been leading the work on behalf of us and talking to partners as well. But the comment he's made about the CQC targeted review is really important again for this board, because the outcome of the CQC targeted review will be presented to the board. That is, we've got very little information at the moment about what form it will take, other than we understand there will be a 6-week review of all the information, a week on site, and then 3 weeks afterwards when all the material will be pulled together, and then a letter presented back to this board. The link to the money that Craig's just described is that they will be particularly focusing on what the flow is through the health and social care system, around things like how the system is working together, how mature the system is, and in particular around delayed transfers of care and around a number of other indicators that they've pulled together into a block. I think it's 9. Is it 9 indicators? 9 indicators that they've looked at that have then been weighted to decide which of the systems they're looking at first. And Plymouth came out of it. It's not Devon or Cornwall, so it is purely the Plymouth bit that we've got going in and out of Livewell and PHNT. And it will have a direct look at delayed transfers of care, things like weekend discharges. So some of the things that Craig is talking about, there's a direct link to it. But that is the process. We understand that the first group of us have to be completed by the end of November. So if you think of the timescale that I've given you in terms of the 6 weeks, 1 week and 3 weeks, they've got to start fairly soon. And so we will keep you informed, particularly when we know what our date is, so that you know what that process is. And inevitably there will be interviews of people from across our system during the targeted review. They've been very clear. It's not being described as an inspection, it is described as a targeted review.
I think those two updates really dovetail together really, really well. So we've got a local A&E Improvement Board, which I chair, and all colleagues are members of that group. And we've been having early discussions, not just with Plymouth, but with Devon and Cornwall, about the new money. And quite rightly, that's about trying to build the capacity and capability within the communities to support people. What we also need to address, though, through the integrated commissioning arrangements that we've got at the moment, is that right now we have a very high number of patients, around 90, who are in the wrong place, i.e. they're in the hospital, and we not only is that not great for the individuals, they need to be somewhere else, but we are also incurring the costs of that, which is significant, about 3 wards worth of patients. So we're in discussion with commissioners about that, but we have to try and get the patients in the right place, and we have to get the money in the right place as well. So the new money plus the existing pressures and getting some headroom around that is really challenging, but I don't want us to lose sight of the challenges we've got right now in one part of the sector.
Judith, sorry.
I wasn't sure at what point to say anything, because it's kind of thinking about the last hour's discussion we've had about the STP around accountable care systems, and then the most recent bit of it. Really, just to comment in support of what we're trying to do, I think, because when we think about children and young people entering the system now and the lifetime of different health and care and well-being needs they'll have, I think it's absolutely critical. If we look at something like the investment over a period of time that Craig's just been describing, we know that social prescribing, for example, initially has a higher cost, or may have a higher cost, not always, but the King's Fund were very clear that it could, but then over time it reduces the cost. And so I'm particularly keen that we really get hold of this agenda, because we are dealing with things at the moment around strokes, around COPD and all of those, but it's about that very long-term view of prevention as well. And it is beyond 3 years, 5 years, we're talking 20 odd years. So I think if we can grab this through the changes we're wanting to put on the table now, however we describe them, I think it's just critical, and it's very much that wider agenda for the board around well-being and using that effectively.
Also, it plays into your Thrive Plymouth as well, doesn't it, Sarah?
So I think that's why, obviously, being part of the subgroup, I know Ruth would really want to do that, to make sure we link fully the opportunities that we've been working on as a city with Thrive Plymouth into all of these plans, and make sure that well-being, that wellness focus is really strong there as well. So I completely agree with what Judith just said. Yeah.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is the work programme, and I'm going to hand over to Ross.
Thank you, Chair. Don't have a work programme in front of you. I think we're going to start from a clean sheet this year, but of course there is a few things that you will need to do as a board, because there's only 3 things that you're statutorily responsible for, so we do need to do those. So for the work programme, and this we won't date any of these at the moment. We'll put them in when most appropriate, and happy to take members' comments on any of these issues. First of all, the Plymouth Plan and Plymouth Report, being the Health and Wellbeing Strategy and Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, will need to come to the board at some point, hopefully before Christmas. We'll also need to look into the processes around the Pharmaceutical Needs Assessment, which is another statutory requirement for this board. In addition, what you've received in the past is some updates on the commissioning from the integrated budget, which I think would be useful again. We've picked up today the delivery locally of the STP, any changes as a result of the acute service review, a subgroup to be established for the accountable care system, so we'll need to update the board on the work there. And there'll be updates over the year regarding Safer Plymouth and Children's Partnership, alongside safeguarding boards and the outcome of the CQC targeted review. Happy to take any other suggestions from members on what we should focus on for the next year. Thank you, Chair.
There's kind of three things that have resonated with me today, and I guess that to an extent you could say they're operational, but I would say they're operationally strategic, which is how we get things on an agenda, I've learned in the past. But actually, the things that kind of have come out significantly for me is the issue around the recruitment and the staff shortage is obviously absolutely fundamental, and just looking further about how we do that, and is that something that we're just dealing with from a health perspective, or how are we integrating into the wider challenges that we have within the city. I've seen a really good piece of work that the council have been leading on about why people would want to come and work in the city, and I think having a broader piece of work around that, because my concern is that people in the economy side of things start to talk about let's get into skills and jobs, and actually my experience in the time I've been in the city is how do you just raise the profile of the city? Why do people want to come to the city, whatever profession they're in? So that push away from what fantastic place where you can do all these things, I'm not sure is the right thing, but might be something we want to look at. But certainly get some professionals around recruitment to look at, is there a different way that we can do that recruitment for health? Because if I'm honest, when I see the adverts, even though I'm not looking for a job, they're pretty dull. So I think there's something we could do around making them more attractive. So that would be one. That kind of links into, I remember us having a presentation last meeting, or a couple of meetings ago, where we were told about the shift away from GP funding, and that there was going to be moved back to that, looking at how you enhance and support GP services, that we needed to look at how we could develop that more. So that fits into the recruitment agenda, but actually it'd be interesting to see what's come out of that piece of work in terms of, is there a strategy around that, how that would happen and what that would mean in localities. So there's a joint bit around that. And the other thing is, when Anne talked about the 90 people in the wrong place, me and Steve have had conversations about, so on a broader housing agenda, we've got a Plymouth plan for homes around building 5,000 homes. But how do we make absolutely sure that those 5,000 homes are meeting the broader needs of our older or unhealthy population, rather than just build homes because we can in places where they're popular? And I think there's not enough being done around that, and it's certainly something that I think we could add some value into to make sure that we don't end up building 5,000 homes and saying, but there's still 100, 200, 300 that we need for people with specialist needs. That would be my three things.
So I think there's an opportunity for us to maybe update the board on Thrive Plymouth, maybe towards the end of the year, and also in the context of what we're aiming to do in the fourth year, but also the need for us locally to have a mental health prevention concordat in place by the end of this year. And so I think there's an opportunity, because they are going to be linked with the focus we'll have in year 4 around mental health and wellbeing. So I think there's an opportunity for us to schedule something on that.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Neglected to mention, the board was deeply involved in work around alcohol a number of years ago, and you have received over the last 2 years updates on how that work progresses, and take a view of an alcohol dashboard. Is that something that the board still wishes to maintain an oversight of?
Yes, absolutely, because I think it's still, particularly in my ward, causing problems, and we've never been brave enough to look at the issue of the strong lagers that are for sale in single cans, and I think we talked about it, but we never came to a conclusion. And I think, if we are going, and I realise these are people who are victims of alcohol, and I'm not saying that we would withdraw it without treatment centres to support, but I still think we've never actually bit the bullet and said, let's do something about it, rather than talk about it. And we've had plenty of talk shops about it. So I think, I would want it on the agenda, but I think we need to be brave enough to actually get in there and do something that changes things.
Yeah, this is probably an opportune moment to introduce myself as the new SAFER chair. Obviously, I've taken over from Andy as from April. In fact, this afternoon, what I'm doing is meeting the chairs of the subgroups, one of which is in relation to alcohol harm, to look at their business plans for the next 12 months and beyond. The next SAFER board is on the 25th of July, so we're meeting ahead of the board to make sure that the plans are kind of in the sort of format that I'd be happy with in terms of taking forward. So the point around alcohol harm is not lost on me. It's a piece of work that is ongoing. In fact, a couple of weeks ago at the Future Inn, we had a seminar stroke workshop, an all-day workshop where people from many different agencies, including the voluntary agencies, Best Bar None, etc., all the agencies you expect to be there in relation to alcohol harm around the city, were there to effectively collect their views and begin to find a way forward from here forward. So the issue isn't lost on me, Chair, and I'm satisfied that we are making some progress in that, albeit there's been obviously a transition between Andy Bolting and myself in terms of handing that work on. But I hope to be able to come back here in the near future to report back to the board in terms of what progress we are making.
I think that would be most welcome, thank you. And I must apologise for not introducing you in the first place. Terry?
I would agree to have some alcohol discussions, particularly in and around fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which I didn't know much about. And if we can incorporate that into discussions, that would be fantastic.
I'm quite happy to close the meeting, and I think I've managed to do it just before 12. So those of you that got to shoot away, you don't have to leave early. Thank you very much. It's been a really good morning. Thank you.